Why don't we condemn a lion for killing? Because it's only humans who are capable of acting morally. A rock or a flower isn't good or bad, and neither is an animal. Only beings who can freely choose how to act have the capacity to be good. And this assumption, the assumption that we are free to choose, really matters to the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant lived in Königsberg in East Prussia during the 18th century. Although Kant's contribution to philosophy was immense, he lived an ordered and quiet life, going for the same walk every day so predictably that the citizens of the town adjusted their clocks. Kant looked for morality outside of religion. For him, any divine command missed the point. Because if men or women obeyed out of fear of God, they were not really acting morally. Instead, he was interested in discovering a route for moral decision-making that was beyond the church, and to find it, he turned to logic and to reason. Everyone claims to know things. We know that Henry VIII had 6 wives, or that the cake is made of chocolate, and that fire is hot. But how do we know these things? Philosophers say that knowledge comes from 2 different sources. There's knowledge we get through experience. Tasting the cake gives us knowledge that it's made of chocolate. Touching the fire gives us knowledge that it's hot, posterior to or after the experience. On the other hand, however, we don't need to touch or taste anything to know that mathematically 1 + 1 = 2. It just is, and we know it intuitively. We know it prior to or before any experience, and this is called a priori knowledge. There's also a further subdivision. Statements can also be either analytic or synthetic. An analytic statement is one that is true if it contains its own meaning within itself, or if it says the same thing twice. A good example is, bachelors are unmarried males. You can't find a bachelor who is not an unmarried male. It would be a contradiction in terms if you did. However, there's nothing analytic in saying Henry is not a bachelor. He might be, or he might not be. If you say Henry is not a bachelor, but he was, you might be lying, or just misinformed. But you wouldn't be contradicting yourself. This kind of statement is known as synthetic. Up until the time of Kant, it was popular to view moral statements as a posteriori, synthetic. That is, they were only knowable having experienced the world, and they might or might not be true. Kant asserted that morality itself was a priori, but a priori synthetic. In other words, the route to morality is as instantly knowable and independent of experience as is maths. But the things that seem to be moral may or may not be true, and according to Kant, they have to be tested, just like any other synthetic statement.
Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me.
To establish that the urge to morality is a priori and within us, Immanuel Kant turns to the essential nature of man, and what he discovers is something almost mathematical in its simplicity and found solely within rational humans: the good will. Unlike every other virtue, the good will is so pure that it can never be reduced. It can never become anything less than itself. Courage looks like a virtue, but it can be turned to evil in the wrong hands. A brave thief is more ruthless and more extreme. His courage remains courage, but his courage put to evil. Not so goodwill. The instant a goodwill is used in a bad way, it is no longer goodwill. It is morality's starting point.
There is no possibility of thinking of anything at all in the world, or even out of it, which can be regarded as good without qualification, except a good will. Intelligence and wit are doubtless good, but they can also become bad if the will, which is to make use of these gifts, is not good.
The good will is a priori, and so recognizable without experience. Statements, however, are not so simple. Whether they look like moral statements or not, they may not always be correct. And for Kant, only a certain type of statement has any chance of being moral. Some statements, or maxims, are hypothetical. I mustn't eat so many chocolates is a hypothetical statement. I should only stop eating chocolates if I want to lose weight. I should only obey the command if I want something as a result. Whereas categorical statements are not done for results. In fact, they are done regardless of the results. For Kant, there were 4 possible reasons why someone might do something that looks moral. He eliminated 3 one by one, and he does so because they are all hypothetical. You might do something good because you will benefit from it. If the shopkeeper who reduces all his goods in a sale is motivated by the buzz of being kind, or in the hope of making a long-term profit, he's not really acting morally. He's doing it for the reward, in true hypothetical style. Some people, on the other hand, act out of curiosity and interest. The counsellor who helps people because she's fascinated by problems is not a particularly good woman. Her career choice looks moral, but, on Kant's criteria, may not turn out to be that of a good woman. It too is driven by results. Neither are religious people necessarily moral. The young woman who doesn't take contraceptives only because the Pope tells her not to isn't good. She is merely afraid of the consequences of disobeying authority. To succumb to authority merely to avoid consequences is not to behave morally. There is, however, a 4th reason why you might behave in a certain way. You might do something because you perceive it's your duty to do so. You may not want to do it, but you do it anyway. This is the categorical imperative, done not for any results, nor because you're afraid. It is the only moral course. So, if morality gives us a categorical imperative to follow our duty and do the right thing, how do we know what actions are actually good? How do we test if a maxim or moral statement is actually right or wrong? According to Kantian ethics, a statement, to be right, must be capable of being true everywhere. It must be universal. If it's good for me to behave in a certain way, it must also be good for everyone to do so.
For an action to be morally valid, the agent, or person performing the act, must not carry out the action unless he or she believes that in the same situation all people should act in the same way.
Kant isn't talking about symmetry or order here, but is more concerned with logic when he makes this important point. If I say promises are made to be broken, and everyone accepted that statement, it would destroy the very notion of promise keeping. There'd be no such thing as a promise if, when universalized, the thing itself was destroyed. There would be no such thing as a lie if everyone thought that lying was permissible. Any maxim that is not universal cannot at the same time be moral. It has failed the first test. Kant's second principle builds on this.
So act that you treat humanity, both in your own person and in the person of every other human being, never merely as a means, but always at the same time as an end.
For Kant, human beings are special. Each and every person is an individual, worthy of respect and as equal as anyone else. As a result, you can never treat anyone as a means to an end. A suspected terrorist can't be tortured even if it means saving innocent lives, because that one life is as important as many other single lives. Sheer weight of numbers doesn't make many more important than one. In the third principle, Kant asks that our rules and statements stand up in real life. He asks that we act as if we had the power to make these rules and imagine them into fruition.
So act as if you were, through your maxim, a law-making member of a kingdom of ends.
In other words, we have to imagine that our smallest moral action could become law, and then ask, would it stand up? If, given the same circumstances, it would, then it was actually the right thing to do. Kant's system of deontological or duty-bound ethics is interested in the action itself, not the consequences, and gives a method for arriving at ethical actions without appealing to any religious vision of God. But God doesn't disappear altogether. Kant maintains that the universe is fair and operates in such a way that when moral laws are followed, it leads us to a world where people are both good and happy. If the universe is fair, it must reward the good. If not in this life, then the next. And for Kant, this is enough for us to assume that there is an afterlife, just as we can also assume there is a God. He calls these postulates of practical reason. They, along with freedom, can all be assumed to exist. They are safe bets if we are using reason correctly and following the moral law. Kant's system is widely regarded as fair, logical, and coherent. It takes both rights and duties seriously and gives real power to people as they make their everyday decisions. Avoiding the pitfalls of utilitarianism where minority interests invariably suffer, Kant is bold in his championing of individual human worth. There is also room within Kant's theory, especially as put forward by the philosopher W.D. Ross, to allow some duties to count more than others. When the father is faced with two drowning people, and one is a scientist on the brink of curing cancer, and the other is his daughter, within Kant, via Ross, there is justification for saving the daughter. It's not that the person is intrinsically more worth, but that they have more worth to you. Utilitarianism would demand otherwise. Although Kant's ethics are appropriate for a pluralistic, multicultural society, and have been upheld as the bedrock of ideas, such as inalienable human rights, there are challenges to Kant. For a start, most people do want to take the consequences of their actions into account, and to ignore them is just not practicable. Situations are invariably complex, and there are instances when our duties conflict, a challenge only partly addressed by Ross. What of circumstances when it may be right to tell a lie? Not because we're arguing that everyone should be free to tell this particular lie, but because by lying we might achieve more than by conforming to a principle of truth-telling. Kant would argue that, in the long run, protecting the principle would prove itself right, but that might be a long way off. Further, there may be occasions when it is necessary to use people as a means to an end. In war, sacrifice of the few may lead to the survival of the many. On top of this, Kant's theory does lead to some strange conclusions. A man who is tempted to steal, but does his duty and doesn't give in to temptation, is for Kant a better man than the one who is not even tempted to steal. This somehow feels wrong. Also, an overarching deontological approach may not be particularly useful in the everyday world. In an overstretched hospital, Kant's theory becomes empty. with little to say about how resources should be distributed among those that need them, other than that they should be distributed fairly. The utilitarian would ask, what is fair? Despite these criticisms, Kant's thinking has been hugely influential in its insistence that morality is more than just personal preference, and happiness can't be promoted if it undermines the rights of others. His ethical system is diametrically opposed to the utilitarian view that the punishment of the innocent can be justified if the majority benefit. For Kant, human beings are always individuals with ends in themselves, never as means to an end. As such, they should never be exploited for some apparent greater good, and always treated with respect. It is an understanding that many people still live by.